Joining me now is a former colleague from our collective NBC days. He's no longer at NBC, neither am I. It's Scott MacFarlane. He's justice correspondent for CBS News. And let's just say there's a lot going on at the Department of Justice these days. Scott, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. I mean, I'm not sure how NBC can stand up without us. I mean, it's the Peacock's doing all the heavy lifting now.
Before you got to WRC, NBC Washington, give me your origin story before then.
Before that, I was congressional correspondent for the Cox Media Group, which is one of those outfits where you do all the affiliate coverage of what's happening in Washington. So you're covering the Georgia congressional delegation for Atlanta. You're covering the California senators for San Francisco. I did that for 8 years. Before that, I was in local news in Michigan. I was in Detroit. I was in Grand Rapids. And before that, I was at Syracuse University. And a lot of us Syracuse University people, we if you want to know how great Syracuse is, just ask any one of us or just let us tell you unsolicited.
I know. ESPN is the network of Syracuse. The last time I checked, it used to be. Yeah,
we're everywhere.
Yeah,
and so I did college radio at Syracuse, which is itself a unique.
That's a big deal. That's a tough thing to. Not everybody gets to do college radio at Syracuse. So usually, if you do that, you're onto something.
We did WJPZ radio, which is the it's on the Mount Rushmore of college radio outfits, and we're very proud of it.
Before we get to what we want to talk about 1 year after Butler, what you've been doing on January 6th, frankly, what the hell is going on with Bondi and Epstein, and we'll get to all that. I'm intrigued by your local news background, as you know, and you've been following. I know you and I've been talking offline about this and all the different ways that I'm trying to work on revitalizing local news with some folks, and there's a whole bunch of people in this space. You've been on interesting sides. You've been with an affiliate on the ground. You've been in Washington trying to cover Washington through a local prism. What's the reality of that? What's the difficulty in that? If you could design a perfect world for the affiliates and how this would work, I'm guessing it wouldn't be how you operated at Cox. So what is the next iteration of best practices for local coverage of Washington? And I go back through the prism of local, right? I think part of our problem with Washington coverage is it's done through the prism of the Acela corridor, not from the ground up.
I couldn't agree more. The idea that the doomsday messages I hear about how, media is fractionalizing, broadcast is shrinking, news is being, compartmentalized. That argument doesn't hold water when you talk about local. Local news has never been so relevant. Local weather, local sports, local news content is now wildly more important than it used to be, Chuck, because as you know, there's so many less providers out there. I mean, who's offering up coverage of the local high school teams? Who's covering the local city council? Who's covering the impact in your community of what's happening in Washington? And there's fewer people now than there were when we were kids. There's fewer people now than when we were coming up in journalism. So it's never been more important. And there's a wonderful future in local news on all platforms, broadcast, digital, social included. So what do I do different now? Everything. Now, every Friday, I carve out 2 to 3 hours of my day every Friday from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. to do local customized talkbacks with our affiliates. What's going on in Washington that impacts Buffalo? Right. What's going on in Washington that impacts New York City, Los Angeles, Baltimore? Every Friday we do this. And if it's not customized, it's not worth your time. If it's not regionalized, it's not worth my effort or your effort. So we make them all local. Right. So it's kind of like my Cox background, because if we're not reporting out to local affiliates about local impact, we're wasting. We're leaving money on the table.
In my hometown in Miami, it's the largest market in America now with a duopoly. It's just a gut punch to me. I just feel I'm just sort of, and yet I understand the business decisions. We all know these different affiliate groups. This happened to be a smaller one that was the ABC affiliate. So now both we're going to have the same owner for both a Fox affiliate and ABC affiliate, and they're not going to have. They're basically combining. There's only going to be one news that feeds both of those entities. This is a growing trend, and it's something I'm concerned about. I mean, what do you hear on this front? I mean, it clearly is a way to reduce resources for local. That's the concern.
Our growth is through local. I mean that collectively, Chuck. I mean that for everybody in the news space, everybody in Washington, and everybody in broadcasting. The growth is through local. That's where people have the most emotive, visceral connection with the personalities, with the talent. And one of the reasons I want to be on television in Chicago in their 4 o'clock news is because that's a different audience than is watching us at 5:30 and 6:30, and they may have an even closer relationship with the people they see on the local. I tell you this: there's so many opportunities being missed when you have a duopoly. You have even more opportunities missed. How come nobody sees the upside in sending out bodies to every high school athletic event in the region? Because the audience will find you. The audience will find what you're offering because they want to see how their kids and their neighbors did.
Well, and let me be totally commercial about this. Who are the parents of you sports now? They're all millennials. Okay, this is the largest, look, as much as I feel totally overlooked as a member of Gen X, okay? It just is, right? Boomers just didn't have as many kids, and that's why Gen X is this small generation. Or boomers waited to have kids and had millennials, right? They didn't even have kids in time to have Gen X. So we are going advertiser demo from literally the boomers to the millennials. And Gen X and Gen Z are not going to be targeted. Sort of Gen X is seen as sort of half behave like boomers and half behave like millennials. So you might as well just target those two groups and you'll pick off Gen X. But the millennial parents are all in their late 30s, early 40s. And you and I understand this business. It's the number one age demographic advertisers are looking for because that's peak spending time. You spend money when your kids are under 18. You spend dumb money. Trust me, as a parent of now 2 kids over 18, I can't believe how much money I've saved over the last couple of years.
I'm in the throes of that right now. Yeah. And I think it requires a bit of imagination about what is content. Obviously, we know what news content is, and it can be better localized. We know what sports content is because we used to see more of it. We should see more of it in the future. But here's an opportunity sitting on the table nobody's picked up. You know where there's been incredible growth is in quiz bowls, academic competitions, school against school. No longer are they broadcast, Chuck. Everybody's gotten out of that business because they couldn't figure out the economics of it. But participation is soaring. If some local organization could corral that, everybody in town will not just watch it, Chuck, they'll watch it live.
Sure.
Like a NFL game. You got to see it in real time because you can't shift time watching that. And these opportunities are sitting out there for somebody to pick up and say, here's a way to get an audience. You know who it is, you know the size of it, and you know where they live. Advertisers' dream.
And that's my whole point of like, how do we depolarize the information space? Go acquire other audiences. Don't try to make an audience consume the stuff you're already giving. Go say to yourself, I want to get this audience. What kind of content do they want? Right? Like you've got to sort of flip the question. All right. Enough about us lecturing our bosses on how to do this better. Let's start. I want to start with Butler. We're just over a year out. You were there. I think it's interesting to me that the coverage a year later, frankly, the entire Washington reaction to this assassination attempt, I feel like has been kind of muted, right? When you think about how loud Epstein is, right? And think about how muted Butler still is in comparison. What's your explanation for that? And do you think there's been enough investigative bodies on this incident?
Butler and January 6th have a lot of connective tissues. One of the things that connects them is that I can't believe there wasn't more of an army thrown at each of them in terms of journalism. And we can get into January 6th.
Both journalism and investigators. I mean, I would argue both. Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. January 6th, this is going to shock people, the most underreported proportionately event of our lifetimes. We'll put that aside for a minute. Butler, because so immediately became a triumphant political moment for Donald Trump, I think that squelched some of the interest amongst some Americans in hearing more about it. The fact that we don't know the motive of the shooter
tells you how polarized we are, by the way.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. We don't know the motive of the shooter makes it an uninteresting narrative because we don't get to find out the why. And we don't find out the why, the storybook's less interesting to read. And because the Secret Service was, found to have committed failures, there hasn't been an effort by either administration to take a megaphone and scream about it. So it happened. A year later, we had to remind ourselves that there was an investigation. We just found out there was disciplinary activity against some of the employees. Didn't even know that. It's amazing to me how little bandwidth it was given.
There's a whole bunch of questions I have. Look, I've been at plenty of presidential events. I had a feeling I knew sort of what went wrong, that it was going to be the local, it was going to be Secret Service's bandwidth it's only so much bandwidth, particularly in a campaign year when you're stretched with multiple candidates on the ticket. You've got spouses that you're now having to have Secret Service. So the Secret Service is spread thin, yet I feel like I've not seen reporting. Let me start there. How much, put it this way, if this hadn't been a campaign year, if it just had been a Donald Trump event, how many more Secret Service of personnel would have been on the ground had there not been essentially, let me think, Joe Biden, Melania Trump, J.D. Vance, Usha Vance, Tim Walz, Kamala Harris. Like, I've named everybody that likely was having active Secret Service protection at that time. Perhaps not Walz yet.
Not Walz. Not Walz.
Yeah, in fairness. So let me, but we know Kamala did. Let me start there. Was this a personnel issue that had it just been President Donald Trump, there would have been more resources and locals wouldn't have even been involved that closely to the perimeter?
Yeah, that's part of the argument, that they didn't have the resources or the manpower they could have had. There's been an argument made that more was requested. The then Secret Service director has kicked back at that. The counter snipers were an addition at that event. That was the first event with the counter snipers, because if you recall, if you think back to July 2024 and all that happened that month,
right,
there was an Iranian threat detected against Trump a day before.
Which
so
is but okay. That's all the more reason to have doubled the amount of personnel at this event. I mean, I hear you on the snipers, and it turned out, we think, although I think there's still not confirmation of this, it's a sniper that essentially saved Trump's life, because that's a sniper got him.
A Secret Service sniper, no less.
Yeah.
Not one of the local snipers. On the ground that day, I tell you, it felt off. And it didn't feel off necessarily because...
You sure that's not... How much have you tried to non-confirmation bias yourself on that? I totally get it. But it's like, now, you know what I mean? Like, you hear that and you're like, okay, how did you know you had that feeling?
Didn't feel unsafe. So let me be clear about that. I didn't feel like we were in danger. It was unsettling because it was one of those July days where it was a grotesque humidity. It was hot as hell. There was no shade, and people were dropping like flies. And the medics were running around there all day, because people get out there in the morning for a 6 p.m. event.
We know this, yeah.
All day. Heat stroke. And so watching people drop left and right was unsettling. Having nowhere to hide yourself, by the way, and having to go on television, you're running around, you're trying to get through the day, you're hydrating. It's just, you weren't yourself that day.
Got it.
Nobody did not feel unsafe, and I want to make sure that's clear. Nobody's out there going, I wonder if we're going to get injured, assaulted, or shot today. That said, this is customary, but also we were getting our heckling. I mean, you know this better than anybody.
That became almost standard, where you were probably numb to it by that, right?
Pretty much. So you're spending 6 hours of people, screaming at you, something that akin to threats at some point. So it was an unsettling day. And that's my most profound memory, is everything felt off from the way you normally conduct business. If you're at a nice air-conditioned arena all day waiting for Trump to do his thing, his call and response, it was different. But nobody felt like they were in danger.
Mm-hmm. So do we look at this as just a Secret Service failure, or you're just not going to stop anybody who's willing to put themselves in harm's way to try to go after a principle like this?
Oh, I mean, the Secret Service acknowledged failures, and they disciplined people. They didn't fire anybody, which frustrates some members of the Senate. That's not my most lasting impression of it. For those of us who were there, it wasn't an immediate or even a long-term reflection on Secret Service. For those of us there, it was such a horror, because you saw an emerging America. And it wasn't
Yeah.
the shooting, Chuck. I got diagnosed with PTSD within 48 hours. I got put on trauma leave, not because I think of the shooting, but because you saw it in the eyes, the reaction of the people. They were coming for us. If he didn't jump up with his fist, they were going to come kill
I
us.
know. I'll tell you. So I was on a plane to Milwaukee,
Convention.
to the convention. I was on a plane that might as well have been a press charter. Okay. Like there was a whole bunch of, mildly bold-faced names, if you want to count me among those, and Jake Tapper, people like that. And the plane's Wi-Fi didn't work. Okay. So Kellyanne Conway was on this flight, by the way. I mean, it was just sort of like, it was just this mix of everybody that you would expect heading to Milwaukee on a Saturday. And we touch down and everybody's phones come on. And everybody starts looking at each other, not saying a word, for total fear of just anything being misconstrued, not anything. And look, I share your concern. Just a little thing. I was literally, first thing I was going to do after landing on Saturday was go to the Nats Brewers game. And I said, I'm not going. I'm not going to be seen going. I'm not doing that. This is not the moment for this. And I think none of us knew what the reaction of that Milwaukee crowd was going to be to this, right? It turned into euphoria, right? It turned into this messiah of feeling. I think that, that this was divine intervention, and the convention turned into this sort of almost out of body experience. Like that convention had sort of, to me, ended up not really feeling like it met the moment. I think Trump himself was still traumatized by the event. You could feel that throughout the week. But I share that Saturday. And what you just described being on the ground was my first thing I thought of was my team down there. I think it was Vaughn Hilliard, if I'm not mistaken, on the NBC side. And Dasha Burns, right? Yep. And look, let's be honest. We've been fearing this for about a decade. That all of this heightened rhetoric, all this crap online, what happened on January 6th, those of us that experienced that as well, you're like, we're a tinderbox, right? There's a fear that this moment is coming. And it's interesting that the fact that we dodged that, you're right. I mean, it is, I don't know what would have happened had the outcome been different.
Many of us on press row, as we talked about this on our text chains for weeks after, were quite confident we'd be dead if he didn't get back up. There was a subset, not everybody, there's dozens of people in the crowd who started comforting us, saying, you did this is your fault, you caused this, you killed him. And they're going to beat us with their hands. I mean, they were going to kill us. And respectfully, the Secret Service had bigger issues in protecting us. When he jumped up triumphantly, it saved us. But that's the thing. I can't eliminate from my mind's eye the look in their faces. That's what America is right now. It's not rational. It's an irrational thought to think the media shot somebody from atop a building. But the lack of rationality is what connects January 6th to this. And how do we pull out of this as a country? Is the defining question of our time, and it's my North Star for my reporting is the lack of stability, the destabilization, the political violence, and the toxicity is defining us right now, and it should underscore all of our reporting.
Your reporting has become an obsession for my wife on January 6th, in that she got really into wanting to learn everything she could about everybody that did this, right? And you were trying to you weren't alone, but you were among the leaders in reporting, not just about what was taking place on the January 6th, but who these people were, right? Trying to understand. It was more out of almost like thinking of it as anthropology, right? I always say that ultimately I consider myself a political anthropologist these days, right? Trying to understand the various tribes of the American electorate. And the amount of people who admitted after the fact they don't know what got into them, They don't know. And I believe them. I don't think, look, do I think some were just given a story to try to get lighter punishment? There's always some of that. But the real estate agents, right? The folks that were fairly well-off people who decided to participate and then realized, what were they thinking? They fascinate me the most and they worry me the most because it shows you how easy it is. That neighbor next door that you have no issue with might get set off quicker than you thought, right? And am I susceptible to this, right? Are we all susceptible? Like, it is, and that's what I took away from January 6th. But man, I feel like you know it so intimately. You know so many of the individuals intimately. How would you describe the different sort of groups of people that participated in the January 6th insurrection?
The rioters were all or overwhelmingly all Trump supporters, but they're a remarkably diverse group of people. And you've laid out some of the differences quite well. Like the problem, people who try to characterize January 6th who don't know it well, who didn't study it, is they paint everybody with one big broad brush as a monolith. It's not that. That's why a lot of people who track these cases, who were prosecuting these cases, who are defending these cases, are shocked that everybody was pardoned because, again, you can't paint them all with one brush. Right. There were people there who didn't know they were violating the law. And we know that's true because at least one man from New Mexico was acquitted on all charges because the judge at his trial determined that he didn't realize he was on restricted grounds because he was so far back in the pack and some police were not demonstratively trying to wave him away. So he was determined under the law to have been found not guilty because he didn't know he was breaking the law. So we got some people who know it as adjudicated by the courts.
By the way, I didn't know that. We're always told that ignorance of the law is no defense.
Well, the prosecutor made a very similar argument in his closing, but it didn't seem to work.
No, okay.
Two people out of the 1,600 or so, two people were acquitted, both by judges, not by juries. They didn't go for a jury trial. Every other person was convicted at trial. 100% jury trial conviction rate, which is distinctive.
Boy, that's a big deal. This is jury trials, and I guess some people are going to say, how many of them were D.C.? All of them D.C.?
Every single one was in D.C.
Right. That's going to be the pushback on the right? Well, it was D.C. Jury trial, man, it's 12 people. I mean, when you can get a unanimous verdict, I don't care where you are. That's a big deal. That is a big deal. It's what our rule of law has always been built on, that this is as solid of a way to determine guilt or innocence as we can come up with in the human species.
Anybody who's done jury duty recognizes how hard it is to even get 12 people to have a communication strategy for deliberations, to get them to agree the sky is blue. How about
agree on a foreman, right? Like that's always an issue.
Who's your foreman?
Yeah.
Getting ahead of myself, you put your finger on the pulse of the defining issue here. They're all from D.C. All those juries are liberal. All those juries are anti-Trump. That's what so many people have argued from day one until now. And there's your broader issue. We have blue state juries and red state juries. Do we have blue state judges and red state judges? Do we have blue state
well, guess what?
and
Here's
red
the
state
problem.
everything?
I do think the electorate believes that the judiciary branch the judges no longer wear black robes, that they are blue robes and red robes. And, Stephen Breyer has criticized us in the press. He thinks it's wrong for us to always point out who appointed a judge, right? He thinks that our coverage of it, I am empathetic of the argument, but it's not strong enough for me I believe in giving the reader, viewer, listener, however you want to view them, more information, not less. Okay. And so I do think it's important. I want to know who appointed Judge X or Judge Y. That matters to me. Now, maybe I'm always thinking with a political mind, but I actually look at it more of an ideological, like who appointed them tells me how they probably are looking at the Constitution, which to me is a slightly different reason than red and blue. But the fact is, because of what the U.S. Senate has done, and look, I think the U.S. Senate is who, you don't have to concur with this. Yeah. But I think they broke the judiciary, right? When the filibuster got eliminated for all this and it became 50+1. I remember speaking with somebody who was in the White House counsel's office during Bush 43. and said, had it been 50 votes instead of 60 votes, they'd have nominated an entirely different group of judges, an entirely different group. And we now
You don't
see
have to go that far. You don't have to go that far
Biden's
back.
judges are much more liberal than Obama's judges.
They're not. If you just go, you don't have to even go that far back, though. If you look at, I was at the confirmation hearings, like you probably were, of Sonia Sotomayor.
Yeah.
And you know who was howling in support of her was Lindsey Graham,
right, saying,
well, elections have consequences. I believe the president can choose his or her own judges. Even that's gone by the wayside, and that's not it's a pretty finite period of time.
Yeah, it is. Go ahead.
The distinctive thing about January 6th court cases, and we discovered this early, is that, even the misdemeanor small ones are interesting. We're going to have to watch every single one of these cases because the smaller cases, the ones where they didn't beat cops, where they didn't seditiously conspire, still had remarkably powerful human stories, but also very telling where we're going as a country. There's one apologetic January 6th defendant who says what she did was wrong. She's the only one. If you
the
go
woman who refused the pardon, that's the woman who refused the pardon.
Refused the pardon.
Yeah.
Everybody else is unapologetic. And Chuck, that was the nature of the court cases. Nobody got up there and asking for mercy at sentencing said a bad thing about Donald Trump. Nobody went up there and said, you know what, this election was legitimate. I don't know what I was thinking. Many of them went up there and dug in saying it was a rigged election. I'll take the punishment you give me. Donald Trump's coming back. He's going to pardon me. This was predicted by the defendants. So either they are great at seeing where the political road is heading, or they're just so unapologetic they speak to what America is like at this moment. And I've made the argument internally here that January 6th has not ended. It's manifested itself into different issues. It's taken on different complexions. But the same irrationality, the same tendency toward political violence, the same threatening environment is here.
Congress was 85% unified between January 7th, 2021, and I would argue March 1st, 2021, right? About January 6th. Okay, let's skip. But basically, for the first 6 to 8 week period, there was a collective sense of, whoa, this went too far. We've got to pull back. We've got to, and then it disintegrated, right? Now you tell me, but I sense that there are probably less than 20 elected Republicans who would today feel comfortable condemning January 6th in the U.S. Congress.
Less than that. I shared this story with a couple colleagues at a workshop, and they asked me, of the 4 years these cases were alive, these 4 years, what was the most distinctive day to you? And I actually said January 6, 2025 is the most memorable and distinctive day of the entire enterprise, because on January 6, 2025, so your 4-year mark of the tragedy, was the first year 0 Republicans made a statement noting the day. Nobody issued a public statement or said a word. No vigil, no honoring of the police officers who died by suicide, no honor of all the people injured that day, of all complexions. And on that day, it became clear that we are not to talk about January 6th anymore in this Capitol, as administrators of the House and administrators of the Senate. Surrogates of the president, supporters of the president run the Capitol right now. And if we don't talk about it anymore, maybe it goes away. And that may or may not be an effective strategy. But there were 0 Republicans who issued public statements. And in the time since, Chuck, I've heard one Republican, mention the January 6th victims, the police who were beaten. That was Tom Tillis, who's going to be out of a job in 18 months. And I'm not trying to make a political statement here, but it stood out to me as, in 2024 and 2023, there were some who mentioned the day, who honored the victims. Now it's down to 0. And what's becoming clear to me now is that obviously this has become a political issue, and it's a round political peg in a square hole. It doesn't really fit because it shouldn't be political. And when you make it a political issue, you damage the peg, you damage the board. And we're feeling the damage of that.
Look, the biggest concern is that his decision to do the broad pardon for everybody is essentially condoning violence. I don't know how you look at it any other way. That, look, if you break the law in service of a political outcome, that's okay. I mean, that's a revolutionary way of thinking, and I mean that in the most literal sense of the term revolutionary. That is not small d democratic way of thinking?
600 of the 1,500 plus defendants, 600 of the nearly 1,600 were charged with beating police officers, assaulting them, and not just with their hands. Bear spray, clubs, bats, hockey sticks, knives, brass knuckles, a stun gun, large pieces of furniture, equipment, boards, insect spray, WD-40. And these assaults were in many cases acknowledged. People pled guilty or were convicted. Some were convicted in less than 2 hours, including the lunch break. So again, if you think about the diversity in the group of defendants, you get a better sense of what those pardons meant and what those cases are. There were grandmas. There were a few grandmas who didn't touch anything, steal anything, or and were sentenced to, sit in jail or probation. But there were also a lot of guys and women who beat cops on camera and touted it, and still to this day have been unrepentant. They were pardoned in the same broad brush, and I think that's been unsettling to some of the victims' families.
So you report on the Justice Department. Is there anybody left involved in January 6 prosecutions, or have they all been fired?
They've steadily been fired. I don't think everybody has been fired yet, but the Trump administration in the second term began with a wave of firings of probationary prosecutors, those who are easily removable, who had fingerprints on January 6 cases. It continued over the first half year, and then another wave of them to start July, where they fired more prosecutors who actually handled January 6 cases. And I think what was really the most striking was the firing of the public affairs specialist for the U.S. attorney who just put out the press releases about January 6th and helped run the website that they've taken down. She was a civil servant, non-political, worked with both parties, and she wasn't a prosecutor or an FBI agent. She didn't choose the cases. She issued her boss's press releases. And she's been fired. And some of this is unsettling to those who survived the attack and those who were, how about the people who testified at the trials? Because they didn't testify with zero risk. If you testified against a January 6th defendant, you're going to get harassed. You're going to get threatened. You put your life on.
So who are the people that testified? Where I assume people that pled? Who else? Right? I mean, who were the
some people flipped? Absolutely. Yeah. They flipped on the high level cases too, Chuck. Not the misdemeanors. They flipped on the seditious conspiracy defendants. The police officers who testified, have been getting threats ever since. Continue to get threats to this day. And they put some of their equity on the line personally to speak at these trials, and they watched the pardons come down. I was not surprised it was a blanket pardon. And Chuck, one thing that stood out to me is a few weeks before the administration came in, one of the members of the House January 6th Select Committee asked me if I had any instincts on how many pardons there'd be. And I said, I'm pretty sure it's going to be everybody, because I don't know where he draws the line here. Where are you going to cut off people? Like who's the last man out? You don't have a field of 64 here. I mean, it's going to be everybody or it's going to be nobody, because he can't draw a line. And the committee member was surprised. He goes, really? Yeah. You were on the January 6th committee. I think you'd have a better understanding than most of how this goes, but he's not going to cut this off somewhere. I was not surprised.
Is there anything in looking back look, I always blame Mitch McConnell for the January 6th committee issue more than I blame Kevin McCarthy. Like had McConnell agreed to the dual mandate, I think McCarthy goes along. I think we have it, and I think we have this a more responsible bipartisan panel. Probably isn't as aggressive, but there's probably at least a consensus of, hey, that was bad, and there would have been a sense of a bipartisan consensus that was bad. Now Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney are thought of as Democrats, right? Just because that's the way the right believes. If you're not with me, you're a Democrat, right? Whether you're a member of the press, whatever it is, right? You're automatically on the left. And yet I look at the investigative portion, and it does feel as if the January 6th committee, as it actually was put together, finally kicked the Justice Department in the rear to get them to do some better investigating. I mean, I still believe part of the problem of January 6th, the post January 6th issue, is Merrick Garland's slow roll on the prosecutions and on the investigation.
The Department of Justice did a ground up investigation of January 6th, which is traditional for many types of criminal investigations. You start at the bottom and you try to work your way up. That takes time. I remember asking Adam Schiff midway through the January 6th Select Committee if they had plans on sharing what they'd found with the Department of Justice. And I remember Congressman Schiff, now Senator Schiff, looked at me, paused a moment and said, why would they need our help? They should be ahead of us on this. And it just spoke to a little bit of either a frustration or a surprise that they would need the help of the January 6th committee. But those primetime televised hearings certainly raised public awareness. Those who weren't following January 6th closely, maybe it raised the awareness of some federal investigators. But yeah, we heard the criticism that the Department of Justice wasn't moving swiftly enough. And you saw the clock run out pretty fast at the end of 2024.
No, and look, you sit there, there's so many forks in the road on handling January 6th, right? There's should the impeachment have happened sooner, right? If Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, I'm still convinced to this day, was always going to look for a way not to do it because he was fearful of creating a divide in his party. I think he thought, and frankly, he wasn't alone in this, that, well, the public's never going to forgive Trump for this. He'll be ostracized. We don't need to pile on. And I do believe he truly thought that. Like, I don't think this was a wishful thinking. I think he really thought that. And I think, look, I am surprised at how easily the party came back around to Trump.
That's what I wanted to ask you. I wanted your thoughts on this because it's those who voted to convict in the House and Senate. It was a kamikaze mission politically. In retrospect, the 10 House members who voted to convict, only 2 are left. Congressman Newhouse of Washington.
And the only reason they're left is because they have unique voting systems that make it hard to directly primary them. It's the only reason they're left. That's right. And in those 2 states.
In the Senate, who's still remaining of the convictors?
Right. Cassidy.
Collins and Murkowski and Bill Cassidy. Now, what an uphill climb he may face in his primary. Everybody else is gone. Right. Would you think they'd all have had the same impact if they had voted to convict and successfully? If they got the 2/3 in the Senate, would they still be picked off one at a time?
McConnell, no, because McConnell, here's the irony. Had McConnell known that Dobbs was going to overturn Roe, which lots of us did think that was going to happen, but he actually could have written off the 2022 midterms in a look, there's no doubt in my mind, as he votes to convict, Rob Portman votes to convict, Tom Tillis votes to convict. There's a whole slew of people that come with McConnell. They get their 18. It's not and who knows, maybe you get 50% of the Republican conference to do it. It would be close, but you might, if McConnell had given the green light, because again, Portman was in, I can come up with at least the 18, the additional, what was it? They needed an additional, they got 7, so they needed an additional 11, but I could get to the dozen on that. And it's probably President Ron DeSantis right now, right?
You don't think the angry Trump supporters would pick off the Mitch McConnells, Tom Tillis?
I think there'd be a few, but they couldn't have done it everywhere.
Okay.
That's the point. They couldn't have done it anywhere. There might have been a symbolic 1 or 2. Louisiana's a tough place. Louisiana's pretty deep red, so that's a tough place to have come from, But, it's interesting to me how there's something in the water in Kentucky. Or should we say there's something in the bluegrass in Kentucky there when you have Tom Massey, Rand Paul, Mitch McConnell, all in their own way comfortable not being on Team MAGA look, the Kentucky electorate's just quirky. It's just a little bit different, or they wouldn't have the senators that they've had over the years.
And a Democratic governor.
And a Democratic governor, right? Like this is just a different, a different electorate that I think you can't overlook. But I think there's certainly, it tears the party apart for a while. But so did Dobbs, and Trump has already been doing it. So it's one of those, you had to rip the Band-Aid off at some point, and then when you chose not to rip the Band-Aid off, guess what? Now the wound has healed, but not in a good way. And now you have a different type of Republican Party, a more MAGA-focused Republican Party that you never would have had McConnell. So, I mean, when people wonder what happened to the Eisenhower-Romney wing of the Republican Party, when Mitch McConnell surrendered, essentially, and said, "No, we're not going to punish him anymore. This was enough." In some ways, it got interpreted as MAGA belongs in the Republican Party, right? Versus he could have sent a message to say, "We want this out."
I think that's certainly right. I think what amplifies it, though, is there wasn't a whole lot of pressure being applied because there wasn't a whole lot of attention paid to January 6th in the years after. There were a few of us covering the ins and outs of that case, and we were all shocked. There was a few of us. Where's everybody else on this? This is a historic event.
And there felt like there was this hidden hand of like, hey, it's too provocative of a story. Let's not overdo it. I don't know how else to put it. There was no individual instructions put out at every news organization, but there was this collective of, hey, we've got to turn the page. We've got to move on. Sort of like, hey, the country's a tinderbox. We need to sort of calm the waters here a little bit, to mix my metaphors. And look, the information ecosystem's broken. I wish I could sit here and say, "Oh, geez, if they'd done," but this thing has been it's so far broken. I don't think we fully appreciate it. I mean, one of the things that has really stood out to me, over 70% of the country is unaware that the Trump family has a crypto business.
Yeah.
And that tells you just how siloed and fragmented the information ecosystem is currently, right? Literally, if you live in a certain bubble, you don't get certain information. You don't know certain things. And so it's, it may be that this is we're further broken on our information ecosystem than maybe we want to collectively admit.
People are looking for affirmation instead of information. They're looking for something that resonates with them, that makes them feel good. And in this particularly toxic political moment, you're going to go to your silo for that, and you're going to be only comfortable in your silo. But the thing about the January 6th coverage was there were remarkable nuggets there that spoke to the political moment and where we were headed as a country. The November 2024 election didn't come as much of a surprise to those of us who covered the January 6 cases. We saw where the political winds were blowing, and there's a great place to read those. Versus, the Washington Beltway journalism muscle is to go to the traditional places, to talk to the traditional people, go to the diner in Ohio, do the cliche things you do. You could have got a great read on things in those core hearings to see where the Trump base was unmoved by January 6th, unmoved by anything else attached to Trump. They were there, loyal, and they loved him.
A friend of mine said to me when I was wondering why there's no more, where's the outrage on this crypto stuff, for instance, and about the amount of just profiting off the presidency. And a friend of mine said, hey, the public thinks they all do it. Trump's just more honest about the grift. And I always come back to that. I come back to something I remember in 2016 on the trail, somebody saying, he's my middle finger to you guys, referring to us in the press and the Washington elite and all this stuff. And I'm like, so I've understood I get the initial sort of what Trump represented. Yeah, I know I know who he is, but guess what? He annoys the crap out of you guys. And I want discomfort. There's been too much comfort in Washington, too much comfort in Wall Street, right? So I understand the sort of the id part of this and the core part of this. What I don't get is that he's not succeeded. He's not fulfilled his promises, and why, it's sad. So many of these people are going to have to feel the pain themselves, whether it's this measles outbreak, which is just totally due to politics, totally due to Kennedy's politics and some of this stuff. It's like we wouldn't be here without the broken information ecosystem and the politicizing of vaccines. I now worry about the rule of law. I'm going to be honest here. If an FBI agent showed up at my door claiming, something here, I'd be like, so is this politically charged? I would assume I'd being targeted. I wouldn't have thought that 6 years ago. But that's how little faith I now see. You put these political operators in these places, And a lot of people are going to view it this way. And when over time, if people stop believing that somebody will be above politics and decision making on the rule of law, it's over. The republic's dead.
That's why I argue unambiguously, internally and externally, that January 6th is ongoing. It's just taking other forms now. When you break norms, when you change systems, when you get rid of the stable foundation of so many parts of our country, these are the type of things you see. And one of the things that the refrain I'm hearing from so many of these fired Department of Justice workers is that there used to be a line. That line is, it gets blurrier or thicker with certain administrations of both parties. That line is gone. And they believe there are political operatives now running law and order. And that raises the type of cynicism that you're expressing here. And I think we can't be the only ones thinking that. But the people that think they all do it, they got some pretty good footing, because you know who was convicted of corruption? A Democrat from New Jersey. You know who also is about to go to prison? A guy who represented a purple district in New York, George Santos. Right. And you have a Democratic congressman from Texas charged by the feds. Very easy to draw equivalences there.
No, when you see Menendez using the language of Trump and the January Sixers to try to advertise for a pardon, it just sort of, you're just like, well, it's sad, it's pathetic, but it's kind of predictable on that front. Look, this is your beat. Talk to me about Epstein. I view the Epstein story as a reminder of how broken the information ecosystem is. This thing, the mythology around Epstein has been built on a sort of mythology that almost goes back decades. It's very similar to what's happened to George Soros, right? There's like this conspiracy built on a conspiracy built on a conspiracy, and you sit here and you're trying to unravel it. And as I said earlier, it's the equivalent of trying to clean up after your dog when they have diarrhea. You just can't pick it all up. Okay. It's impossible to explain. How would you explain Epstein to the average person that just doesn't quite know what to make of this story?
The analogy I used is pardon me if it's a little bit crude here, but the analogy I've drawn is, you remember in the Muppet Show, Statler and Waldorf, the old guys up in the box who just always just laying down, like just dunking on the guys on stage. Doesn't matter if it's Kermit, Beaker, Miss Piggy, they're always just trashing the show.
They were my dad's favorite. He'd let me watch the Muppets with him after we watched the Louis Rukeyser Report. So as a kid, and what kept him okay with the Muppets were the two old guy Muppets. He loved those guys.
It's even more entertaining than Louis Rukeyser. Statler and Waldorf would always just be trashing things going on the stage. It's much harder to be on the stage. And what you have in the Jeffrey Epstein story is Statler and Waldorf type of trolling, conspiracy theory fomenting, fanning of flames by the people who are now on the stage. And they don't know how to navigate that, because it's easy to fan the flames of a conspiracy theory. It's very hard to douse the flames. And right now, the MAGA base is playing the role of Statler and Waldorf. And everybody's out of position, it feels like. And this makes it a bigger issue than Jeffrey Epstein, doesn't it? It makes it a whole referendum on conspiracy
this is
theories.
more about MAGA. It has almost little to do with Epstein itself. I mean, look, I've always believed it is what it is, which is a whole bunch of powerful people are suckers for a free private plane ride. And they overlooked that guy's ethics and morals for a free private plane ride. Unfortunately, I've seen this for a long period of time. It's a disease that's on left and right, which is these elected officials it is astonishing what they'll do for a free private plane access. And so I have no doubt that all of these folks look the other way on Epstein. And I have no doubt that most of them probably were not stupid enough to engage, not like a Prince Andrew, who doesn't seem like the brightest bulb on the Buckingham tree over there. But so, I could Occam's razor this, and I sort of get it. It's kind of seedy. It's kind of sleazy. And Epstein sort of, to me, exposed how easy it is to sort of be a sleazeball if you have a private plane and you have some money.
What a corner they're painted in, because let's presume these files have the names of people suspected of abuse, suspected of misconduct, but
They've no
proves not
evidence.
proof.
They don't have any evidence.
Maybe
Right.
maybe it's totally unsubstantiated. It's
Right.
just it's a false claim. You can't just release that
It's
and put these
defamation.
people's names out there.
These folks could sue the government and probably win.
And you can't get your good name back if you're associated with that crime by mistake. If they could redact the names, that's not going to satisfy anybody. So they're in a jam here, and you see how that internally causes fractures at a place where you didn't used to see any fractures. The Trump base, the Trump surrogacy.
Well, I think it's proof that there's sort of, and this is where, look, Trump became a magnet for, there's always been, frankly, there's a fringe on the left and the right that are very conspiratorial. Okay. And in fact, this is why so many of them unite on JFK files and on Epstein, right? There's this conspiratorial. The amazing thing about the right is that MAGA mainstreamed these folks. These folks always existed, but they were always kept on the outer edge. You know, for my conservative historians out there, think the John Birch Society groupings of these folks. But instead, John Birch became the mainstream and National Review at the time, and Bill Buckley's conservatives were sort of the outliers. And that's what it feels like MAGA's become. Literally, the Birchers and the Buckleyites have switched places.
Political realignment is so fascinating. And
it's my favorite. It's the only thing I enjoy this aspect of it, other than the fact that the fallout could be catastrophic for the Republic.
I was there in Southeast Ohio in mid-2000s, Chuck, watching a Democratic governor get elected from the Appalachia and a Democratic congressman and a Democratic senator. And on the other side of the Pennsylvania state line, Democrats were sweeping. It's gone. It's gone. I remember more recently covering Loudoun County, Virginia, that real purple enclave. Now it
was red.
Blue,
it was
blue,
red
blue.
leaning at one time. It's not just blue.
Yeah.
It's not just blue, Scott. It is the heart of progressive Virginia now.
Right.
It is arguably, Loudoun's become, in some ways, almost as, they produce more of the progressive activist candidate base. Now, Arlington may be more liberal, or certainly more blue, but it is interesting to me that the Democratic candidates that are the most progressive are coming out of Loudoun.
Yeah. Oakland County, Michigan, fascinating case study of the realignment of American politics. And that, to me, is an underappreciated story. And it's going to define part of the midterms. I just wonder if the old muscle memory is not ready for the new political complexion of these races.
It's not just that. I just worry that we all don't collectively have enough resources to cover this as thoroughly as we once did. We don't have good polling anymore. It's a lot of mediocre polling that you can derive some interesting conclusions out of it, but it's just more difficult. There's just not as much happening. Pam Bondi, is her job safe?
She gets some pretty declarative endorsements from President Trump as the week began. Yeah. I mean, these were not half-hearted. She's also, at this point, taking on a new type of role for a U.S. Attorney General. There's a surrogacy to how she speaks of the president. And I think it's
the first time. What's the last time an attorney general spoke as a surrogate before?
I think it predates us if it happened. I mean, it predates our time.
I guess it would be Bobby Kennedy. Okay, the last time. I mean, we have to look. And this is, how how many times I have conservatives point to that? Well, but the Kennedys. Yeah, and we changed the law to make sure you couldn't do that again.
So she's, to a degree, pioneering a new type of voice from an attorney general, and it, for all we know, be emulated in perpetuity. And I do wonder, of all these new norms being established, how many of them are now in perpetuity. And little things, Chuck, like the National Capital Planning Commission, this little obscure agency in Washington, D.C., which is in charge of federal buildings and aesthetics. Trump's taken it over. And it seems obscure, but it gives you control over all construction in Washington to a degree. All the historic buildings are now kind of under the president's control. Does the next guy want to do this? The Library of Congress are making a move on the librarian. Does the next person do this? I wonder how much of this is a new permanent.
Being a former DC-based, when I literally DC-based reporter the intersection of Washington, D.C. governance with the federal government. How seriously should D.C. residents take the threat of the federal government taking over the city?
They take it seriously. They right now are dangling because of the federal government over $1 billion in their budget.
The fact that it's over a football stadium, you're just like, only in America, right?
Yeah.
This massive, like, constitutionally questionable decision over a football stadium.
Yeah. Actually, the more you say it to yourself, doesn't it sound totally understandable now or totally believable?
We're America,
totally
yeah. America, yeah. F yeah, right? It's just like, that's who we are.
They are gravely concerned, but I think the concerns are at this point transcended by the concerns about the federal layoffs. This was a bulletproof economy in Washington, D.C. Bulletproof until now.
Yeah, no, the city's in, I think the mayor does her best to manage Trump in a way that I don't know if anybody else is. I'm impressed. May not work, but I'm impressed with how she's trying to go about it. First she confronted him the first term. This time she's doing it another way, and she's managed her own politics. It's interesting. She has impressed me as a political athlete. Forget, like, we could sit here and nitpick this or that, but she's got a city council that has gone very far in one direction. She's got a White House that wants to, and here she is sort of caught in the middle, and she navigates it pretty well, considering how because she knows when to be confrontational and when not to be.
Also on the eve of an election year too, so it's not inconsequential when there's primary challenges. It's quite a needle to thread.
Yeah. Before I let you go, I'm not going to put you in a position about your employer. Just how's morale?
I think there's a macro version of that question. How's morale in broadcasting right now?
Right. I think morale's terrible in that. That's what I tell people. Anybody that works at traditional media, if you work for a corporate-owned entity right now, you feel unsettled. That's the sense I get.
I think there's a new reality that is coming to all of us. We cannot be commodities. We need to be artists and scientists. We need to be distinctive. We have to have a personal brand in journalism and in broadcasting now too, to help our collective, employers, but also to help ourselves. And when I talk to young people, I'm like, what's your specialty? What are you going to do different in the name of journalism and civic duty? Because you're going to need to have a personal brand. You can't expect an employer to bring one to you. You need to bring one to an employer. So that type of paradigm shift, Chuck, may be depressing morale for some people in the industry. Others see it as an opportunity. And
that's my whole message to younger folks is, hey, look, I got my first break during a time of disruption. It was when the internet was first coming about. This is in 92, 93, 94. And so, but I was in my early 20s. It was a good time to be in your early 20s during that disruption. It was a bad time to be in your mid 50s. I say the same thing now. Probably not the best time to be in this industry in your mid 50s. A great time to be in this industry in your early 20s.
Nothing but upside. There's nothing but opportunity, and you're a blank slate, which means you don't have to break any bad habits or reinvent yourself. You just have to invent yourself.
Yeah.
But personal brand's important right now, and as recently as just a few years ago, Chuck, it wasn't so vital. It was helpful. It wasn't vital. Yeah. Now it's vital.
I remember Brian Williams telling me, like 10 years ago, he said to me, he says, he goes, you have a longer future than I do, he said. And I said, why do you say that? And he said, because I'm a generalist, you've got an expertise in something.
No?
And I knew exactly what he meant. And I give the same exact advice. Go dive in, go become the expert on X. What do you care about? Go become the expert. Don't cross the line into advocacy, but go become the expert on X. And now that said, I'm going to give you something to react to sort of go full circle about local news. A guy named Richard Gingras, who is until recently ran the Google News Initiative. He regularly says in speeches that the worst thing that happened to journalism was the movie All the President's Men.
Everybody wants to be Woodward and Bernstein.
Everybody wants to be Woodward and Bernstein. Nobody wants to be the service-oriented journalist that helps people live their lives in their community. And ultimately, I'm curious, what do you make of that? Because I do believe local journalism is different than national journalism. And local journalism has to be a little more service oriented, a little more community helper, customer service at times. Not to say you're not going to do accountability when it's necessary, but 90% of your work actually should be in service to the community. I don't know how we teach that or celebrate that.
The future of local is so strong, and your initiative you're undertaking is so wise. The way it reminds me of the lesson I got when I figured out how to do that old Washington correspondent for the local station job. Somebody wise told me, Scott, you're doing this inside out. You're looking in Washington for stories that resonate in Atlanta, or looking for stories that resonate in Dayton by looking around Washington. You should be talking to the mayor. You should be talking to the school board in Dayton.
What are they
in Atlanta.
concerned about?
What do they care about?
What do they need from Washington?
What do they need?
Yeah.
And that's how you do it. And what's more, once you start doing that, you're building your contacts in those local communities. You're going to be a better Washington reporter, and you're going to be more valuable in that community. And once you flip that paradigm, it all loosens up. And I think in a macro way, Chuck, if we take that approach, we get into the communities, we decentralize, we have a much brighter future. And broadcasting has a wonderful future ahead of it if we do that.
All right. Scott MacFarlane, how local have you become? Are you Nats, Caps, Wizards, Commanders? Are you all in, or do you still have some hometown?
22 years here now. 22 years in D.C.
Okay,
I predate the Nats, which is cool, right?
That's awesome. That's good for you. So do I.
I become more sympathetic to the Commanders than I thought I'd be. But
it's amazing what a change in ownership does,
it's
right?
It's amazing what a change in ownership does.
I feel the same thing. I never thought I'd feel like neutral about them. I'm never going to celebrate them. But the fact that I'm neutral and kind of like, I hope Jaden Daniels succeeds. Good for him.
I was shocked by how accepting I was.
Yeah.
Like, this is actually a likable team. I kind of like these guys.
Josh Harris is the type of owner. I mean, look, I wish the learners would emulate him, which is if you want to make money in sports, build a winner. You can't make money not building a winner. It just doesn't work that way. And that's what we're learning with the Commanders. If you build a winner, it's amazing the stuff that melts away. And by the way, that could explain why Republicans have fallen in line with Trump. They hadn't won in a while, and he won.
You're winning a lot now. Winning a lot.
Winning has a way of appeasing the masses. Yeah. Scott MacFarlane, good to talk with you, buddy.
If I catch, Chuck, keep it up, man.
All right. You got it, brother.